Welcome to the Crush Cravings with Confidence podcast. I'm Coach Lisa Callahan, a recovered emotional eater. I ended decades of self-inflicted struggles with food through taking a journey of self-discovery, which revealed the secrets of what was going on underneath the food. Throughout this podcast, we'll explore topics that are rarely talked about, like low self-esteem, lack of confidence, people-pleasing, and decades of self-sabotaging behaviors. Rather than just focusing on the food, we'll dive deeper into aspects of who you are as a person and how you ended up relying on food for comfort to begin with. My mission is simple: to empower women to regain their confidence and prioritize self-love, regardless of the number on the scale. Discover what you've really been craving, and trust me, it's not about the food. This podcast is based on insights shared from the Women's Emotional Eating Community Support Group on Facebook, so be sure to check out the show notes for the link to the group and a complimentary gift just for you. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hey, welcome to another fun and insightful episode of the Crush Cravings with Confidence podcast. The topic today is, why am I thinking about food all the time? So this episode is not going to give you solutions for how to stop thinking about food all the time. And instead, we're going to validate that thinking about food all the time is really distracting. And it really leads you to what I would call the garbage dumpster of your own mind. And it can be quite scary at times because you end up not recognizing with awareness what you're doing. And then after you do it, you're like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And it really doesn't help if you're telling somebody else and they're like, oh yeah, me too. That part feels like, it's like, oh, okay, so I guess everybody just feels like this. But then you see your spouse or perhaps another friend or even your kids that can just push away food. And you're like, wow, why can't I do that? And so even if you have a friend or a relative who's like, yeah, me too, cookies call my name. All I have to do is look at a cookie and I gain 20 pounds. Even though like we know that other people feel this way too, we do end up feeling quite alone in our process of this experience, because at the end of the day, when we're sitting there having this feeling like we can't control ourselves around food, or our thoughts are constantly going to food, it's really just us and us. And it gets really annoying when you're struggling with this and you have a friend that's been struggling and you guys are sort of talking about your stuff and complaining about all of the same things. And then suddenly she finds a diet that works for her. And now all of a sudden she loses 30 pounds and you're inside kind of feeling like annoyed because you're like, wow, how come I can't do that? I know when I was struggling with thinking about food all the time, I would, run into people all the time that were maybe on different diet plans. And I remember this one time I had a friend that I hadn't seen in a while, and she looked like she had lost like 30, 40 pounds. And I was like, wow, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm doing paleo. And I was like, wow, what's that? And she gave me all these recipes to make these paleo pancakes. And I started making them, but because I was struggling with binge eating, I ended up overeating them and I ended up gaining weight. And then I felt really jealous that I was like, gosh, how come she can do it and I can't? Because I thought we were starting off in the same place because, she was going on a diet too. I thought that everybody had to live on a diet so that then they didn't want to eat all the time and they didn't have to think about food all the time. And I just thought I hadn't found the right diet for myself yet. And so round and round I went, endlessly searching for the right diet for me to go on. And then feeling really alone and isolated when it seemed like, other people were just kind of bopping around their day and didn't seem to be thinking about food all the time. And then I didn't want to tell them that I was thinking about food all the time. So I just pretended a lot that I wasn't. But like I could be in a conversation with somebody and, we're talking and my mind in the background is going like, are you going to eat that cheesecake? Are you going to Sit there. You're not gonna, okay. You're not taking another bite. Oh, maybe I'll take it. No? Okay. All right. So how am I going to get through this conversation with that cheesecake sitting there on the freaking table? And I don't know, like, that was the thing that I was thinking. Like, that's the stuff that was rolling around in the back of my head. And in my thoughts, I assumed that, other people weren't necessarily feeling that way. And I just assumed that it was because they had more willpower than I did. They were in control of themselves and I wasn't. They had more motivation than I did. And I never really thought that, like perhaps, like just perhaps, that they didn't have a binge eating disorder. Like I didn't realize that that's what I had. I never thought for 1 second that anything that I had was considered to be a disorder. Never. I didn't consider that. And so I just didn't know any better. So I couldn't do any better. Since taking a journey of self-discovery and identifying my invisible emotional relationship with food, that really started with understanding myself on a wider perspective, not focusing on food at all, being able to get to know myself as a human being and recognize that I was actually using food to keep myself away from ever uncovering or discovering the root cause of all of the past pains that I had been through in my own life. I had no idea that this was happening. So it took me a bunch of years, actually about 6 years, to figure out my own self. And then once I did that, I was able to look at the food thing and think to myself, wait a minute, am I just using food to hurt myself? Bam. It was like lightning bolts struck in my head. And I thought, oh my gosh, none of this thinking about food, planning food, what am I going to eat? How much am I going to eat? How little am I going to eat? Are you going to eat that? How am I not going to eat that? Like none of those thoughts, all of them, like none of them were about food at all. And when I really think about the thoughts alone about the food, all I see now is fear. Every part of it. If I eat that, am I going to gain weight? If I say that I'm not going to eat this, am I going to be able to keep my promise that I make to myself? If that person over there isn't going to eat that piece of cheesecake, am I then going to feel deprived? Because, there's this whole FOMO thing when you're dieting. You feel like, well, gosh, it's not really fair that they get to eat that and I don't. And so there's all these little background voices. There's all this noise in your head when you're thinking about food all the time. And what I know now, different than what I knew before, is that a lot of that background noise is just a part of yourself that is leading you towards the craving for what I call a subconscious intention. Now, a subconscious intention, the word subconscious alone means that this intention is lying below the level of your conscious awareness. You don't know it exists. And maybe you've heard about the difference between, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So we kind of know that our thoughts on the top surface of our head are coming from our conscious mind. And then underneath that is our subconscious mind. And I'm not going to go into, scientific details here. What I am going to say, though, is that some of your thoughts are lying below the level of your conscious awareness, that you literally don't know that they're happening. So they're rambling on and on in the back of your head. And you don't realize that those subconscious intentions, those subconscious thoughts are leading you to a result that you're going to get if you keep thinking those thoughts that is mismatched from what you say you want. So all of this concern about what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, how little to eat, food. Can I refrain from eating that? When is the next time I'm going to get that? wow, they're eating that and I'm not. Like all of those thoughts were just leading me down into my subconscious mind, where my result ended up being mismatched from what I said I wanted. What I said I wanted was to take good care of myself, to be healthy, to be at peace, to be happy, to be content, to be comfortable in my own skin, to, keep myself at a reasonable weight. Like that's what I said I wanted. But then what I ended up getting from all of those thoughts was fear, guilt, shame, disappointment, regret, embarrassment. The list goes on. And so what I said I was going in for with all of these thoughts about food, which just seemed to be innocent enough, that it wasn't leading me to a great outcome. It was actually pulling me farther and farther away from my inner voice, my inner peace, the calm inside of me. All it was taking me further and further away from the loving, kind version of myself that was certainly always there to, lend a hand to a friend. I mean, if anybody ever asked me for a favor or anybody asked me to do anything, like I was right there, right? I'm a very helpful girl. I like to help people, right? And it feels like a really good connection. But then on the inside of myself, I had so many thoughts that were negative about myself. So it was like what I put out on the outside and what I was telling myself on the inside, they were two different things. And that was all covered up by the thoughts about food that just kept swarming in my head. And so it did take me a bunch of years to figure this out. And the way that it happened really was that I took a journey of self-discovery. So what that means is that I started to take some courses online, and they were with a wonderful, beautiful coaching company called Your Infinite Life Coaching Company. And you can certainly look them up. They are phenomenal. And I started to take these classes. And when I took these classes, I didn't know what I was in for. I didn't know what I was getting out of it. Somebody had recommended it, and I asked them, I'm like, well, what am I going to get out of this self-discovery work? And they couldn't even necessarily answer the question. They were just like, well, you know what? I don't know how to describe it. You'll just learn new things about yourself. And I'm like, what? What don't I know about myself, right? I thought I knew myself so well. Once I took these classes, though, it became apparent that some of my way of thinking was the very same way of thinking that was leading me towards feeling guilt, shame, disappointment, resentment, overwhelm, embarrassment, like all of those things, because some of my intentions were set at an unrealistic level. And they were also contaminating with like fear because, like I said, every thought that I had like 24 hours a day was all about food. And so when I was thinking about food all the time, it was really hard to focus on anything else. And like I said, what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, how little to eat. You might as well have just slapped a big fear sign on all of those things because they were all scary. What if I gain weight? What if I can't lose weight? What if this is it? What if there were so many fears. And it was also topped off with a lot of I'll be happy when thoughts. Just as soon as I can get through this week, if I can end up, losing 3 pounds, I'll be happy when. If I can just make it through the party next week and not eat that bread, not take that slice of pizza, get through it, I'll be happy when. And so all of those I'll be happy when thoughts were all fear-based. So what I was really doing with my food thoughts was I was giving myself a very unhealthy dose of fear day after day after day after day. Now, I know that, sometimes this food habit, this food thing carries on into the night. You could be lying in your bed like really wanting to do the best thing for yourself. It's 11 p.m. You're lying there. 1 hour goes by. I can't sleep. An hour and a half goes by. Nope, not happening. By the 2 hour mark, you're like, you know what? I better get something to eat or else I'm never going to go back to sleep. Boop. You get up, you go have something to eat, you go back to bed, your eyes pop open first thing in the morning, and what do you feel? Oh, I did it again. Shame, embarrassment, guilt, disappointment, regret. It's all there. And so when you really think about these food thoughts and you're like, why am I thinking about food all the time? It's because there's a subconscious intention for you to feel a certain result that you're getting because you're thinking about food all the time. And we find our subconscious intentions through our results. So the one that came up for me over and over and over and over again was guilt. So it like literally almost didn't matter what I did. The food thoughts, the food noise, the food actions, the eating, the not eating. Like even if let's say I told myself, I'm never eating chocolate again. I mean, that's an unrealistic promise to make to yourself. And yet I did it all the time. I was constantly setting myself up for failure with unrealistic expectations of myself. And so what I would end up doing was then I would break that promise to myself. And I don't care if it took 3 days, right? So the whole time during those 3 days, I'm like, look at me. I'm doing good. I'm not eating chocolate. This is great. Whatever. And then it was all of that, noise in my head. I'm still thinking about food, right? Even though I'm thinking about maybe how I'm not eating at that moment, I'm still thinking about food, right? Because now I'm thinking about what I'm not eating. And so when this takes place over and over and over again, it ends up creating this fearful place inside of you that ends up being a subconscious intention because it ends up giving you a result that is mismatched from what you say you want. And when you have this result that's mismatched from what you say you want, you will discover your subconscious intention. And so what I started to recognize once I learned about subconscious intentions through taking a journey of self-discovery, I started to recognize with awareness that the reason why I was thinking about food all the time was because it was an easy entryway towards the result that I was getting to end up feeling guilty. And it was just like this repeat cycle. But when I was in it, I couldn't see it. And so even just taking the journey of self-discovery, like I did recognize that I had these thoughts that were meant to dim my own light. Like they were meant to make me feel bad about myself. Some of the thoughts were really narrow-minded, like they were just assumptions. I had a high sensitivity level, like somebody could say something to me and I carry on about it in my head. What did they mean by that? Or maybe I would say something that I felt later on was like, oh no, did I say something weird? Like, what did they think about me? Like I was so worried about what other people thought of me that oftentimes just that worry alone would get me to feel this negative energy about myself. And so I was working on that consistently for 6 years, really just like doing the research, doing the homework, reading all of the self-help books, going to these courses, following Brene Brown, Mel Robbins, and Brendan Burchard, and Tony Robbins, and like all of the greats, right? Like everybody that you would want to gain some spiritual advice from. And I even started journaling and going to yoga and like doing all the things that they say you're supposed to do. And I was feeling more at peace with myself and I was feeling more connected and more aligned. I was. But those darn thoughts about food continued. Nothing changed with the food thoughts. And so once I was kind of through this spiritual journey for myself, I decided to go to health coaching school, and I became a certified health coach with the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. During the time, and it was a 1 year long course, during the time that I went to become a health coach, I started to read about binge eating disorder. And as I was reading, I felt my cheeks get hot. And I was like, oh no. I'm like, this is binge eating disorder? Really? I'm like, that's what I do. It's this constant thinking about food, and also where food can just be used to like take you away, right? I think I've said it in past episodes that there's a difference between just like overeating. You go out to eat and I don't know, the dinner's really good and you kind of leave the restaurant a little stuffed. Different than when you are away from yourself. You're just like, you're gone. And suddenly you've like eaten this thing and you sort of wake up, and it could be in the middle of the night or it could be in the middle of the day. Suddenly your car is on autopilot. You're driving into the fast food restaurant, or you're doing what I did, which was sneaking food out of those little bins at Whole Foods. It's true. It'd be like getting the little samples, or like I'd get the, couple of chocolate covered almonds or chocolate covered milk balls in the package. And then like I'd eat them before I was out of the store. I mean, it was like, it happened so fast. And I was like, what did I just do? And I started to recognize, I'm like, wait a minute, that was the launch pad for me to then tell myself, well, you already screwed up on your diet. And then the rest of the night was just more of a free for all, because I'd tell myself, I'll start tomorrow, I'll start Monday. So all of it was connected, and it was all very, very like sneaky in the back of my mind, meaning that it was subconscious. Like I didn't really recognize that I was doing it, not with any like high level of awareness anyways. I just kept thinking, all right, tomorrow's a new day. I'll start another. Like I kept doing that over and over and over again. And that is where your subconscious intention, which is again below the level of your conscious awareness. So if you don't know you're doing something, you can't change it until you become aware. And on the day that I read that about binge eating disorder, I was like, uh-oh, like what is going on here? I'm like, oh wow, that is actually okay. That is actually what I do. So then I started to think about the name, like binge eating disorder. And I was like, well, that kind of feels like, I don't know, just feels like heavy, I thought, well, I had already learned in my self-discovery courses that everything was figure outable, and that you could always like choose something that you wanted to change as long as you had a level of awareness about it. That it really didn't matter like when you became aware of something. It didn't matter if you had been doing the same thing for 50 years. That if your thoughts are the very same thoughts that are taking you to a place that is mismatched from what you say you want, and you know that that's a subconscious intention, then all you have to do is open your mindset to a new level of awareness, and then you can fix the problem. And so it's so interesting because life is made up of a series of moments that seem so serious and so important 1 minute and somewhat silly and absurd the next. And that's what this was for me. I was like, wait a minute, is this really what I'm doing? And so once I became aware, and if you haven't listened to my Levels of Awareness podcast, which is number 18, go back and listen to that, because you're going to see that wherever you are on that awareness, pyramid that I do, you're going to be able to understand with awareness where it is that you might be the one thing that's standing in your own way. And I promise you, if you're thinking about food all the time and you think it's about the food, you are actually mistaken. Emotional eating, binge eating is not actually about the food. It is about what's going on underneath the food. Now, mind you, I want you to follow whatever your doctor tells you. I want you to follow whatever path your heart center tells you. All I'm saying is that if one person can change so dramatically as I have, by thinking about things in a different way. So actually breaking a paradigm. So a paradigm means that it's just a belief system, and that's just how it is. And there's nothing else you can do about it. It is a belief system. What I believe, though, is that paradigms can be busted through. They can be opened up. They don't have to stay that way. They're just beliefs. And so if you can shift your paradigm, if you can shift your belief that emotional eating is about the food, and then you can open up your mindset to a new level of awareness. So that way you can get to what's underneath the food, and you can really be able to expand your level of awareness beyond what you think is going on right now, which is that you're thinking about the food all the time. You're always going to get more of what you focus on. So if you keep telling yourself that this is about food, and if you also slap a label on yourself, telling yourself, well, this is binge eating disorder, that might be true and all. I mean, I had that, right? I looked at the definition. I'm like, oh, I have this. And yet at the same time, I decided that I wanted to lift that label off of myself. And I decided that I just wanted to call it a thing. I was like, you know what? I've got this food thing. That's what I called it. And for just the thought, like, if it's just a thing, and if it is something that's diagnosed in a book, like if it's there, well, there has to be a solution to it, right? So when I started to think about this and I took my self-discovery principles and started to apply them, some of the principles in self-discovery that I've learned is that all problems are solvable. There's another flip side to this. All pseudo problems, fake problems, are not solvable. And honestly, all of the stuff that was leading me to fear, well, if I wanted to solve that, what I could do is I could feel my fear and then go for it anyways and not let the fear stop me. Now, once I was able to do that, I found my courage, right? When you feel fear and you do it anyways, you find your courage. So even though I had all these fear-based thoughts and all of them were about food, what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, how little to eat, what did I weigh? Did I eat a piece of pizza and then weigh 3 pounds more the day after? And oh my gosh, the world's going to explode, right? Like, just like I said, life is made up of a series of moments that feel vital and important. One moment, like that was like all I could think of. And then silly and absurd the next. I was like, really? Okay. All right, you ate a piece of pizza and you gained 3 pounds. Well, that's pretty average because you just put a bunch of salt into your body, right? Like, I do have a human body, right? But the thing is, I wasn't thinking about myself as a human being. I was thinking of myself as a human doing. Do this, do that, follow the rules, follow the plans. What's wrong with you? I'll be happy when. Like, all of that stuff weighed me down so much. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I don't even know if I ever knew who I was until I took a journey of self-discovery. And then I started to question everything. I started to say, Lisa, is that actually true? And do you want to keep believing that? Do you want to keep believing that food has so much power over you? Do you want that? Is that where you want your focus to be? And I decided that I didn't. So through the course of taking action that was different than the traditional diet plans, that was different than the traditional, mainstream, eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that, I started to not focus on food at all. I was like, you know what? I'm not focusing on food at all. Instead, what I started to focus on was my thoughts. I decided, I was like, well, let me ask myself these questions. If I keep thinking this, if I keep thinking, I'm not going to eat chocolate again forever, like, is that thought going to help me grow? Or will that thought keep me stuck? And then I started thinking, wait, is that thought a love-based thought? Or is that actually fear? Because I'm like, well, then what happens if I eat the chocolate? What's going to happen when, And so that gave me a lot of anxiety. It gave me a lot of things to focus on outside of myself. And so as soon as I started to apply these things and I told myself I'm not thinking about food anymore. I'm just not going to do it. It took about another maybe 8 months or so. And don't forget, I was doing this on my own. So I was just trial and erroring. Like I was testing the waters. I didn't know what I was doing. And I had no one to coach me. So although I had taken a lot of self-discovery courses, I didn't have anybody to work with food, because that person, if I had hired somebody to work with me with food, well, what were they going to do? They'd put me on a diet. I don't want to be on a diet. That's the opposite of what I want. Actually, I wanted to be able to be free. A lot of people come to me and they say to me, Lisa, if I could just be in control of myself. And I say, well, let me ask you a question. If you think about like the word control and the word freedom, and then you think about the word love and fear, which two match? And, 99% of the people that I will talk to say, oh, well, wait a minute. Control is fear. Love is freedom. And I say, yeah. Do you want freedom? Because if you do, I can show you how to do that. And they're like, yeah. And typically after they say, yeah, there's the big word and it says, but. And then that's where all of the subconscious fears just start pouring out. But I know I can't trust myself. And I know if I eat this, then I'm going to gain weight. And I know, right? Just pour in the fear. Remember, you'll always get more of what you focus on. So as long as you're focused on that, you won't have the ability to stay present, to meet yourself right where you're at, and to be able to forgive the past version of yourself that just didn't know any darn better, period. Like once you become aware of this, you will start to recognize, like you're like, oh my gosh, I have been so focused on things that seemed so vital and important. And now I realize they're kind of silly and absurd. And for a minute, you might feel like legitimately embarrassed. You might be like, oh gosh, what have I done? Why did I waste so many years? And the thing is that when you get into that mindset and you want to beat yourself up for it, you're like, why did I waste so many years? You have to take a pause. You will have to forgive yourself, because you cannot hold yourself accountable for something that you did not recognize with awareness was wrong to begin with. And that's why I say that we have to get away from thinking about the food, because if we don't, you will stay stuck in those, and we'll call them again, pseudo problems, false problems. And those ones, as my former coach Pam would say, are meant to eat your heart out. They're just meant to keep you stuck. And so if we can push that aside and we can teach you how to come in almost to the back door of your own self, so that way the subconscious past part of you almost doesn't know what's going on, like you're going to take back your power from these subconscious intentions. And that's what we do actually in Crush That Food Thing Self-Discovery System. And so it's a really, really cool process. And I want to share with you now about that wording, like food thing. So you might be asking, all right, well, Lisa, how do I know if I have a food thing? And I'm going to give you 20 different examples of being able to ask yourself these questions. And then you'll be able to recognize with awareness, okay, wait, I do have a food thing. And then if you have a food thing, I can help you, which I hope feels really good to you. All right. So having a food thing means that you struggle every day trying to figure out what to eat. Like it just food. It's like an arrow being shot into your head and you just can't figure it out. And it almost feels like you wake up every morning and you've got like, I don't know, 3 arrows in your hand, and you start to take that shot towards a dartboard and you think that you're just, going at one bullseye. And then suddenly 100 bullseyes pop up and you've only got 3 darts. And you're like, where do I focus first? I don't even know. And it becomes so overwhelming and so consuming. It feels like it's eating you alive. You have a food thing. You've literally been on one diet or another for more than a decade. So just like me, I thought going on a diet was going to be the best thing. And I was jealous. I really felt jealous where somebody would lose 30 pounds and I'd be like, how did she do that? And I felt like, oh, it's just not my turn yet. Like, I wish I could find the one that works for me. The thing is that a diet will work for weight loss. But the thing is that weight is a symptom of an underlying problem if you're struggling with binge eating, right? It's not like you just, I don't know, you went on a cruise for 2 weeks and you put on 5 pounds and, so you're like, all right, let me cut out this bread, for the next week. Like, that's a diet. That's easy. Living on a diet or thinking that you have to live on a diet or like struggling with this thing that I'm talking about where you're thinking about food all the time and you have a binge eating thing, right? And then wanting to fix that by going on a diet. I mean, that's like having an internal, I don't know, something that's giving you a rash on your skin and just putting cortisone on the rash so that you can't see the rash or maybe it doesn't itch as much, but not fixing the actual like infection inside of you. That is the same thing. And honestly, that is cruel. So if you have a food thing, going on a diet is cruel. I want you to remember that. Number 3, you've been stressed about your body image since you were a teen or after you had your first child. I was just talking to somebody the other day that was sharing that, after they had their children, that's when it all, kind of started. And I was like, well, how old are they? I'm thinking maybe they're 6, No, they're like 36, right? So these things that we think like, and we just like let 36 years go by. And it's just like something, happened 36 years ago. That's the problem. I mean, it's just not realistic, and also not acceptable. It's not acceptable to have something that happened 30 something years ago as being the root cause of why it is that you've been struggling for 30 something years. And that's why it's not as simple as just like losing weight, because most people that I work with have lost 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 pounds multiple times. If we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, I mean, that's the definition of insanity. So we've got to make some room for it. So if you've been struggling with your body image since you were a teen, you have a food thing. You're constantly thinking about food, what to eat, how much to eat, how little to eat, how many calories, how many macros, how many points, and you're constantly doing that. And you think that it's working because in between you're binging or overeating or secret eating or whatever, you feel really confident. But you know what? You're so much better than that. You are learning the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then you wonder why you're bored and you're eating out of boredom because you're relearning the same thing over and over again. You know what to eat. You don't have to, measure your 10 grapes in a bowl. Like, you don't have to do that. You know what to eat. And so if you're constantly struggling with thinking about food all the time, you have a food thing. You've tried keeping track of all your macros, counted your points, calories, eaten shakes, special bars, special meal plans, only to end up in the same place again and again and again. You feel like if you're not controlling every single morsel that enters your lips, that you're totally going to be out of control and that you will never be able to stop eating. That is all fear. And it is really, really not great for your nervous system. I know there's a lot of podcasters out there or coaches that talk about the cortisol levels and such. I don't necessarily talk about all that stuff, that science stuff, but it's real. I mean, it's true. So if you're living and you're using this food thing as being this thing that's keeping you in this fight or flight, this all or nothing mindset, this fear, like I said, life's made up of a series of moments that seem really vital and important one minute. And then now that we're thinking about it, it's like, what am I so afraid of? Right? And so if you're using food to keep you locked in fear, well, that's a subconscious intention. And you have a food thing. If you get mad at yourself and beat yourself up for overeating and then wonder why you just can't eat like a normal person, you have a food thing. Because that whole comparison is the thief of happiness. So you would be using your food thing to subconsciously crave you, reminding yourself that you are less than. And that's a food thing. That's sad. That's a subconscious intention. You fluctuate between strict eating and stress eating. So this is that all or nothing mindset. And the all or nothing mindset is laced in perfectionism. And perfectionism is fear. You feel guilty throwing food in the garbage, so you choose to eat it and let it turn into garbage inside of your body. So basically, that reminds you of how very unimportant you are. Oh, it's not a big deal that I turn this thing into garbage in my body. I am full. I don't want to eat anymore. I almost feel nauseous. I don't want to throw food away, so I'll throw it in my body. You have a food thing. You struggle on a daily basis feeling like you're out of control with food. So again, bringing that fear back into it, and it's just like all day fight or flight. Every day, probably around the same time, you get an incredible, overwhelming urge to eat sweets or junk food. This might be in the afternoon or late at night. So that is a craving that's coming up that is coming from a past version of yourself. Like I said, there was that guilt. Well, every day I had to fuel this guilt because it was living inside of me. And before I healed the guilt, every day around 3 p.m. would be when I fed it. It was like a little pet. So I had a pet named guilt. In Crush That Food Thing Self-Discovery System, we call this version of you your broken heart island girl. And we have a lot of storytelling in Crush That Food Thing Self-Discovery System because I don't want this whole binge eating thing and fixing this to be dark and scary. We make it fun and empowering. And so everything that we teach you is in storytelling. It's really fun. Food is on your mind 24/7. And in the morning, you always start off with the same good intention. Today is going to be a good day. And yet before you know it, you think, here I go again. That it's going to be a good day, or I'll start over again on Monday. That is a setup. It's a setup so that you can get to the subconscious intention when you get to say to yourself, here I go again, which brings you guilt, shame, disappointment, regret, sadness, anger, you name it, right? Embarrassment. You've been trying to lose weight successfully and keep it off for decades, okay? This is not a revolving door. Like I said, if you want to lose weight, go on a diet, and then it will stay off because a diet will keep weight off. If you have an emotional eating or binge eating or a crush or a food thing, then a diet's just not going to work for you. So let's push the pause button. Let's get off the ride and let's start to do something new. You feel like food controls every emotion in your life. If you're happy, you want to eat. If you're sad, you want to eat. If you're angry, you want to eat. If you're social, if you're alone, food is always there. Food, 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 food. You have a food thing. And the thing is that parts of why you're telling yourself that you're eating, if you're happy, you're sad, you're this or you're that, it's just the permission that you are craving to give yourself. Like that's how the setup happens. You just tell yourself that. And when you're telling yourself that you're eating because of blah, 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 sad, happy, mad, angry, alone, whatever, that's just the permission that you're giving yourself to get to that subconscious intention, AKA your broken heart island girl. You are a people pleaser. You would do anything for anyone, but have little time for yourself. Even though you love helping people, sometimes you feel a bit taken advantage of. You have a food thing. Most of the women that we work with would consider themselves to be people pleasers. And if you're going to keep that label on, we're going to have to break through the paradigm that you were put on this earth to please everyone. Now, being in a higher spirit and being in service, that's something that all of us want. We all want to be helpful. But when you're doing things and you're saying yes to things, and then it's causing you to feel anxiety and it's causing you to feel insecure about yourself, and then it's causing you to feel overwhelmed, and then you're harming yourself because you've had to do this thing for everybody else, you have a food thing. And you're doing that because there's a subconscious craving for a feeling about yourself that gives you permission to think that you're not that important. You're less than. Everybody else comes first. Fear, 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 and fear again. Sometimes you tell yourself that you're lazy and that you just don't have the motivation, which again is totally not true, since you would be the first one to volunteer for everyone else. You would help out anyone, period. And so when you're in this place and you're contradicting yourself, you're conflicted. And so when you're in that conflicted space, that doesn't make you feel good about yourself. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. On one hand, you're like, I want help, I want to change, I want to do all these things. And then it's like you're turning around and smacking yourself in the face. And so you can't be the one that's wanting help and then be the one that's beating yourself up. It just doesn't work that way, because how will you trust yourself if every time you get near yourself, you pummel yourself by telling yourself that you're lazy, by calling yourself names, by not being kind to yourself? Like, it just doesn't work that way. You have a food thing. Let's see. You tell yourself that you don't know what's wrong with you, or you put yourself down and call yourself not so nice names. Okay, we just talked about that. You have a food thing. You have a little voice in the back of your head that talks you into eating things that you don't want to eat, and then later you regret it and you feel guilty and ashamed, embarrassed, angry, so on and so forth. So we talked about that a little bit earlier too. You have a food thing. And last but not least, you wish there was a magic wand or a magic pill to just take all the stress and anxiety away. The thing is, and this is really the truth, is that because you're so focused on food, you're not able to understand from the roots where it is that you missed the lessons of how to be inside of yourself, how to set boundaries, how to have courage, how to have peace from within. And somehow or another, you got stuck in a pocket of time that allowed you to create subconscious intentions that just are serving a past version of yourself. Now, everything that you get good at happens through repetition. And if you have habits that are serving a past version of yourself, that will never work to break free to get to a future version of yourself. First, you'll have to heal. Well, first you'll have to become aware. Then you'll have to heal, forgive yourself, and be able to start building new habits that are aligned with a future version of yourself. So it's as if the past you cannot remember her as much. You will start to memorize a future version of yourself. And that's how you'll crush your food thing. All right. This was a great episode today. Thank you so much for being here. As always, we have a lot of things that we offer in our show notes. And this week, I want to introduce you to a new course that we have called Crush Cravings with Confidence Academy. This academy is 25 amazing lessons that are going to lead you towards the beginnings of your self-discovery journey. Now, you might have heard me talk about the Mindset Makeover before, and you might want to ask, like, what's the difference between these two courses? A lot, actually. The Mindset Makeover is a really beginner course, and it's such a great opportunity to take a bite-sized piece of self-discovery. The academy is more learning. So each lesson is about 45 minutes long, and it comes with an entire beautiful, and I mean beautiful, I'm so proud of it, 84-page workbook. That's digital, so you can print it out or you can do it online, whatever. So it's really exciting that we opened up this academy. Now, the difference between the academy and the Mindset Makeover versus Crush That Food Thing self-discovery system is those two options don't come with coaching. Coaching is amazing. So if you want to just see which one of these options would be great for you, in the show notes is also a free book a call link. It's called a Food Freedom Discovery Call, and it's where I will take the call myself. I have a beautiful team that works with me. And yet I feel very aligned with taking all of my phone calls myself right now. I do have an assistant. So if you happen to book on the weekend, it might be with her because I don't work on the weekends. But at the same time, most of the calls are done by me. And I'm really excited to be able to dive in and talk with you one-on-one and give you a little bit of additional support and some information privately if that is what aligns with your best interest and it's what you want to do right now. So, all right, it was such a pleasure being here, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.
All right, my beautiful friend, that brings us to the end of another episode from the Crush Cravings with Confidence podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening today and took something from our conversation that you are going to put into immediate action. I love spending time with you and would be so grateful if you would share this podcast with at least one friend today who you think might be struggling too. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any other amazing topics. And please, please do leave me a review. It would mean the world to me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.